Please welcome writer-director Nikyatu Jusu and actress Diop. Welcome. Thanks for being here. By the way, Diop just got nominated for the Gotham Awards for her performance.
Yes, thank you, Roger. Thank you for having us.
I'm going to start with you, Nikyatu. The fact that you tapped into African tradition to express Aisha's inner turmoil, how did that come about?
So this story is, there are pieces of my mother's story in this film. I'm first generation American. My parents are from Sierra Leone, West Africa, and my mom did a lot of domestic work growing up. And I knew that I didn't want to tell a straightforward drama about a domestic worker in New York. I knew that I didn't want it to feel like a PSA. And so I wanted to, which is fine, PSAs have their place. Like no shade to PSAs, but I wanted to incorporate some elements of magic and folklore that spoke to my lineage. Mm-hmm. And America is a country of immigrants, and so culturally specific folklore is just as American in the cinematic canon, is just as American in the cinematic canon as what we've become used to seeing in the horror paradigm. And so I knew I wanted to externalize Aisha's internal journey through that folklore.
Mm-hmm. And Anna, amazing performance.
Thank you so much.
It's not only a psychologically demanding from you, but also physical. What was it like for you to command this role?
Well, similar to Nikyatu, my mother too is an immigrant.
She's here, right?
She is. She
knows
Oprah lives in Santa Barbara, so she was like, "I'm gonna come to this one." Yeah, we immigrated from Senegal when I was almost 6 years old, and we did it for the same reasons Aisha does in the film. My mother moved us so that she could help create a better life for me. So it's a story that's deeply personal to me. So immediately upon reading it, I was emotionally very engaged with this film.
But did you understand the physical? I mean, the psychological aspect of it is demanding as it is, but this is actually, you're dunked in water, you're thrown.
To be honest, the physical aspect was the last thing on my mind. To be completely honest, I mean, I was on a series called Titans for 4 years, which is very physically demanding, so I'm very used to doing stunt choreography and executing very demanding stunt scenes and being very physical. And I love to swim, I love the water, so the physical part, the physical aspects of it, I wasn't very concerned about.
This was part of the casting process, by the way. I needed someone physical, so I only considered people who had that athleticism that I needed. Mm-hmm. So Anna, I think one of the questions I asked you was like, can you swim?
Can you swim?
Are
Do you
comfortable
work out?
in water?
Yes and yes.
Would you mind having spiders in your mouth?
Right. She's fearless.
Well, thank you. I mean, when you love something so much, she could have thrown me into the sky and let me fall, and I would have done it because I wanted so much to bring this woman to life and honor my mother and honor these women. I would have done anything. And I'm glad it all worked.
I mentioned to you outside that there's a dichotomy visually in the world of Aisha's world, private world, and then when we go to Amy's world, the colors, the design. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about that dichotomy?
Yes, I love talking about the aesthetic because authorship is something that often we lionize in cinema, and I went to NYU grad film where I was taught by quote unquote auteurs. And when I say quote unquote, I mean, I think that, you know, I don't believe in authorship. It's such a collaborative process, and you're only as good as the people who choose you in return. And I had an amazing slew of department heads. So Jonathan Guggenheim, our production designer, was pivotal in terms of thinking about the color palette that differentiated these spaces. Charlize Antoinette, who did the costume design, was really pivotal in thinking about the ways that joy is evoked through certain colors when Anna's immersed, when Aisha's immersed in her community. She wears a lot of marigold and oranges and yellows. And when she's working in Amy and Adam's home, she kind of matches this desaturated lagoon aqua color palette that's very blue and a little bit of like, not vibrant blues, but desaturated blues. But also, you know, Jonathan was really smart about thinking about the water motif in Amy and Adam's home, because these figures of folklore, Anansi, the spider, and Mami Wata, visit Aisha mostly in Amy and Adam's home. And so Mami Wata in particular is a water spirit. And so thinking about how do you portray these water elements in a home that is devoid of soul, essentially.
Warmth, yeah.
And warmth, yeah, and empathy. And so the beauty of our production is that our producer, Nakia Moteri, was one of the people who fought for time, which is priceless. Like, you have these budgets, but time. Fighting for time to have your department heads speak to each other and have a collaborative process and understand the color palette across the board. No one is working in a silo, no one is working in a vacuum. Everyone is talking about the colors that speak to their departments. And I was lucky in that regard. And Rena Yang, our cinematographer, is also brilliant. So all my first choices chose me back. I say this in every panel and every interview, and I'm lucky in that regard, but my department heads really just poured into the frame.
And Anna, I would love to hear what you have to say about the fact that we were talking about the color palette, the fact that when you're happy, you wear the yellow marigold, and throughout the film, we can tell your state of mind vis-a-vis the color. Did that help you build a character? You know, tell us your frame of mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Charlize Antoinette, our costume designer, during the costume fittings, she and I were very vocal about wanting to express Aisha's mental state through her clothing and through her wardrobe. So as the film continues and you see her kind of ascending or descending into this madness and into this frazzled and, you know, confused state, her clothing, not only the color, but the shapes of it and where it's sitting and how well it's put together are very reflective of Aisha's mental state as well. But to Nikyatu's point, having all the departments be in communication about, in this space, these colors are warm and vibrant and loving. The food is wet and it's cooked and it's, you know, all of these pieces. And for me, it was very reductive. I was like, warm versus cold, happy versus sad, you know. In my mind, that's just how I organized the two worlds.
And tell us about your accent. It's amazing.
Thank you.
And the fact that you were so authentic to it. Was that hard for you? Did it take a lot of research?
It was, because I was born in Senegal, but as you can see, I don't necessarily sound like it because I've been raised in the States my whole life. Almost, and but of course it's a culture and an accent and a language that's in my cells. My mother sounds like this, my father sounds like this, all of my cousins sound like this, so I'm very familiar with it, but I needed to get it very right, and so I worked with a Senegalese professor and linguist and rapper, KT Sene, and we worked about 4 hours every day that I had prior to starting filming. To also get the right balance of it too, because I couldn't do my mother's accent all the way. It wouldn't have been, sorry mom, but it wouldn't have been, I don't think, discernible enough for audiences to completely understand. So I had to find a balance that was still, you know, clear.
I would love to hear you talk about the two mothers in the film, you know, Amy and Aisha, there's such a contrast between the two of them. Can you?
Yeah, there's a contrast, but there are also a lot of parallels. And what I always say about, you know, the luxury of being both the writer and the director is that there are pieces of me in every single character, you know, and so, including Adam, you know, including Malik. So it's like, these are two mothers who have to outsource work, outsource the raising of their children to other people because they are participating in a capitalistic society. And, you know, women often have to do disproportionate domestic labor on top of potentially being a breadwinner in their families. And so that is, you know, I think even in creating an antagonistic force, it's important to see the humanity in that antagonistic force. And Michelle Monaghan brought so much humanity to Amy.
It could have been
A caricature.
A caricature, and
I was
she's
trying
not.
to avoid that. You know, I literally, some of the names I won't say, but some of the names to cast for Amy, like, would have taken the film in a complete opposite direction. And I really did not want a caricature. I wanted an Amy that felt so tangible that it was uncomfortable, you know, for audiences to see that reflected back because she has that nuance, and Michelle brought that. So the beauty of that is that, like, Anna and Michelle found time to find the subtext in the text and bounce off each other in a way that we could play on set.
Mm-hmm. But it was calculated, the fact that both women have somebody else raising their children.
Yes, you know, I think most of my work right now is commentary on motherhood, commentary on fractured motherhood, commentary on navigating a society that proclaims to support mothers but does not show that through action. You know, no matter what mother you are, what type of mother, and how much privilege you have, but there is still a hierarchy within that. And so, you know, that tension exists in domestic labor, which is a really prevalent source of work for Black and brown women and immigrant women, particularly and historically. So it was something that I wanted to make commentary on.
Anna, the Amansi spider and the Mami Wata are such integral to the story. Were you aware of the traditions of, and yeah, go ahead.
I was, but only a little bit, certainly not as much as Nikyatu is. She's very well read in it, and even after getting the role, I didn't actually do any more work on it because Aisha herself isn't that fluent with them either. And so I allowed myself to kind of be as ignorant as Aisha is when it comes to that, as so to allow these experiences to be as confusing and daring and difficult for her. But I loved that they existed in this story because, like Nikyatu always eloquently says, much better than I'm going to do now, they're symbols of resistance and rebellion. And so as an actor, to play with what is it to be imbued with that, and how does it then manifest behavior in a character? And we see Aisha become bolder and less apologetic as that happens.
Correct, which is a follow-up question. The calibration of the character where we find her becoming, she finds her inner warrior in the progression of the film. Can you tell us about delineating that?
Yeah, I mean, you so beautifully said it, but they are these, again, symbols of resistance and rebellion, and what they give her is this kind of oomph and this courage and this audacity even. And I say audacity because she's in a precarious situation. She's undocumented, and she needs this job, and yet she still sticks up for herself, and she defends herself, and she corrects Adam and says, no, this is what I'm owed. And she speaks up to Amy, and she becomes also even more, what's the word?
She's empowered.
More powerful, yes, essentially. And yeah, I mean, how did I get to that? I just imagine my mother and these women that stand in that kind of integrity and dignity and power. Nikyatu is very much like that, and she was always directing me towards more of that energy as we were getting into those scenes. So,
And you know, tell us about subverting the horror genre, where like you navigated, but you're actually turning it inside out. I'm just curious about relying on the tropes of the horror genre, but you actually make them your own.
Thank you. I think about my creative North Stars in terms of who I admire. And I admire people like filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro. I admire filmmakers like Bong Joon-ho, Park Chan-wook, Jennifer Kent.
Yeah. The Babadook.
Psychic?
No, I was like, I was watching the film, I was like, the Babadook.
The Babadook, yeah. And even Lynn Ramsey, you know, like, the people I've mentioned all have the luxury of creating work that is cross-genre. You know, they don't have as many requirements around being pigeonholed into one genre in the ways that Hollywood requires, because this is a different business structure. But even Ari Aster, Hereditary, you know, it's like, that's about generational trauma and like, you know, lineage and a matriarchy that is fractured, you know. So I'm always interested in the darker genres that navigate bigger universal themes. I'm less, Guillermo del Toro has a quote about, you know, being less interested in jump scares and more interested in the ways that we've used nursery rhymes to illuminate bigger truths. And that's the way that I like to work.
But do you see that as an entry point, or do you see that as a detriment?
No, I see that as a superpower. You know, I think that the work that I gravitate to is cross-genre. Like you have a dark comedy, you have a family drama, you have horror elements, you have thriller elements, all in one piece. Like I think about The Host with Bong Joon-ho. It's like a creature feature, a family. I don't know if anyone has seen The Host, but
yeah,
it's so many things in one. And I love filmmakers who navigate those different genres within one piece. And I know that because of the nature of what I'm navigating, I have to be defined as one thing, especially with who's come on board. Like we have I'm cognizant of who is attached to our film. Blumhouse is going to ring certain bells, and so, but that makes it even more admirable that they took on our film and Amazon, because it's a new way into what their canon has been.
But are you concerned about the fact that I know for a fact that certain people that are, I won't name names in the audience, that were like, oh, it's a horror film. I don't want to come in. But I was telling them that no,
it's not the traditional, yeah.
This is like, it deals with immigration.
Yeah.
It deals with motherhood. There are so many deeper layers to this.
I agree, and we're maneuvering it in real time. You know, some audiences and some critics fixate on, they use all their word count to talk about why this is not a horror, and it's like, if that's all you took from your experience, that this is not a horror, then you were unable to engage the work. So capitalism is about tricking. Commercials, I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but commercials are loud as hell. Like you'll be watching something and the commercial comes on, it's like, buy this thing, you know? And it's like,
I mean, like in the volume?
Literally,
In the
literally, the volume gets louder, and you know, we're all navigating a system that tricks people into caring about things or buying certain things, and whatever tools that we can use to get people to see the film, I'm open to navigating that with my first feature and learning from what that looks like with this, because we were one of the few films that went into Sundance with no distribution in competition, and so, you know,
You won Sundance.
right. But that wasn't enough. You know, it's like you still need that powerhouse, that machine behind you. So whatever tools we can use at our arsenal, in the same way that my protagonist has to use whatever tools she can harness to survive the system, I'm willing to trick people into, and I don't feel like it's a trick. I shouldn't say trick, because, you know, I mentioned a bunch of filmmakers who are, I don't think Ari Aster gets as much critique about, like, I didn't experience any jump scares, because the reality is that people are conditioned to see work through a certain gaze, which is the white gaze. And I think a lot of people are bumping up against other issues with Nanny, that they're using, you know, they're falling behind, this is not a horror, to not genuinely engage the work. I think it's a crutch, you know? And so I feel like I'm getting critiqued in a way that other horror filmmakers who are navigating elevated horror are not getting critiqued. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that.
Well, in my world, you were not being critiqued.
No,
I
but
actually celebrated the fact
thank
that you
you.
were able to grab the horror genre to navigate, you know, timely subjects.
Thank you.
Yeah, and the production design, when you're in Amy's apartment, is like a horror, a haunted mansion, and then when you're in your world, is this warm. You know, tell us about working in those two environments, your warm environment and then that maze of a house.
Yeah, well, our production designer, shout out to Jonathan Guggenheim, is fantastic. And it goes back to Nikyatu's point. She just hired excellent people. And as an actor, when your director does that, it makes everything easier. So as soon as I walk into those spaces, it informs so much about my behavior. I stand different, I feel different, it's colder, it feels colder, and so naturally I just move in reaction to that. But yeah, when I first walked into that condo, the first thing I saw was teeth on the wall. And they were real teeth, they were human teeth, and they were just there as a piece of art, and it was so jarring, and however one feels if they walk into someone's home and you just see human teeth on a wall. So that helped inform also my behavior, but yeah, all I had to do was react to the very impeccable, specific sets that they created. There was nothing else for me to do. It was well
One
done.
of the most striking things about the film is that nothing is as it seems. So, like, there are all these constant microaggressions that are being thrust upon your character. What was it like for you as an actress to be feeling those very subtle, but they're microaggressions throughout the film?
Well, I think Aisha says so much without saying anything, and that's how she responds to those moments and to those microaggressions. She's a person of incredible dignity and integrity and very intelligent. So she still stands up for herself, but she does it silently, and I think she does it through, it's very internal, but she still finds a way to sometimes physicalize that. Mm-hmm. What you're saying just reminds me of something that happened with Michelle. She came up with this incredible thing with the red dress. Yeah. She was like, I've decided that this was a dress that Adam gifted me and I've never worn it, but I'm putting it on her for the first time as a way to test him. Mm-hmm. And I've decided you're not gonna have shoes with it. You're gonna stay in your black Crocs as a way to also kind of humiliate you. Mm-hmm. And so when she puts it on me, everything about it feels wrong and cruel.
Mm-hmm. And one of the aspects that I don't know if the audience was aware of, the fact that she's got a master's degree in English, you know, your character, and it's like you're more educated than anybody around, but still.
Noticed a lot. Thank
Wow.
you. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, but you put it all out there. It's just a matter of like, yeah, taking it all in. It's like she's got a master's degree in English, and then she's like, people are not
being deduced to this.
Correct.
Yeah, type of treatment. But it's what I've seen my mom navigate. Nikyatu's own mother is a novelist. She's a brilliant woman and had to come here and do domestic work too. Yeah. We grew up with these women. Yeah. The ways they respond to microaggression are silent, but they're powerful. I feel very much when my mother is uncomfortable in a situation.
Same,
Like you feel it. And I'm glad that you noticed that with Aisha. I hope so. That's what I tried to portray, was this kind of silent power and dignity. And a lot said without saying anything, but it's an energy. Yeah.
Yeah. How, tell us about shooting the film. How long did it take, and was it arduous or?
Oh my God.
In New York, the peak of COVID.
Listen, it's amazing that I'm here in front of you all now. I'm still recuperating. I'm still not present in the rollout because, so we shot for 28 days in New York City on location, from Tribeca to Bed-Stuy to Harlem. Yeah. And at some point, we shot at the peak of COVID, like Anna said, last summer. And at some point we were talking about, we are a tier 1 film. My producer won't allow me to say the number, so I say we're a tier 1 film, meaning we're under $10 million in New York City. And at some point we were talking about cheating Toronto or other cities with tax rebates and easier navigation of the pandemic. But New York is my surrogate home. I know when I see people cheating for New York, and it just doesn't feel right. And this has felt like a very New York story. So we were one of the few productions that made it to the end of the 28 days. Like once you get a positive COVID case in Zone A, your production is shut down. And we didn't have a positive case in Zone A until the second to last day of the 28 days. And I really do think my father was watching over the production. My father transitioned from cancer around the time, right before we started shooting. And there were studio films with literally 100 times our budget that were getting shut down left and right. And with a tier 1 film, I don't know if you all know, but if you get shut down, you're not going back up because you can't afford to go back up. So second to last day, our producers had to convince the crew to continue working because of our positive case in Zone A. Wow. And I later found out this really cantankerous AD in the camera, not AD, AC in the camera department, who was kind of just really moody the whole shoot and a little belligerent, I found out had a child with cancer. And it just really kind of brought home that the microcosm of, making a film about capitalism, essentially, and the ways that capitalism enslaves us all. I had people on my own set who on the surface looked like they had a certain privilege, but were navigating something very human, to be shooting in a pandemic and working on a set. These are people who are sacrificing a lot, and I think about that all the time. But we made it to the end, and we went through a breakneck speed. Our editor started editing the second to last week of production. The editing interviews were a whole other thing, because it wasn't quite the same magic that I had with my department heads. But we landed with an editor who worked really hard and started editing, and we made the Sundance deadline by the skin of our teeth. So we edited from production through the deadline. We're still sending revised cuts, and I'm still breathless, to be honest. I'm just really thankful that people have responded in the festival circuit, and our distributors have supported us in this way, because we worked really, really hard, and every penny that we got for this production is on the screen, so.
I have to ask you, theater geek that I am, I'm a big fan of Leslie Uggams.
Oh,
we are.
And, tell us about casting her and Anna working with Leslie Uggams.
She came in like a storm. I needed someone who felt stoic and regal, and because these lines in somebody else's mouth could sound really clunky, it's kind of like message, and but with Leslie, she reminded me of who I was thinking of. I was thinking of a Toni Morrison or a Maya Angelou type. Yeah. And so in her mouth, it sounds poetic, And she came in and she just
God
killed
is
it.
speaking.
Right. We should all listen.
I forgot my lines after our first take, because it was the first time I was sitting across from her and she was doing it. And the way she holds space, it's she's so still and so powerful. I mean, she's Leslie Uggams, but I just forgot for a second. And Yeah, she's amazing. She
is.
came in late too and got it quick.
She got it quickly. She got the
Wow.
lines quickly, and she had dense lines. And
Yeah.
so that's another thing about the script is like, I wrote it, and it's not a Bible, it's a springboard. And so look at the lines, make them yours. Like, I love improvisation. I love excavating the subtext from the text with my actors. So I wasn't married to what I wrote at all.
Well, she's like, the most remarkable thing about it is like you forget is Leslie Uggams. She just inhabits the role. So
Such a compliment.
you mentioned the two. We talked about the two worlds. You know, there's a timelessness about the two apartments and the world that Aisha and Amy. Is that something that you strived in the cinematography and the look of the film? Is that, yes, it's very specific Senegalese neighborhood in New York City, but there's a timelessness to it.
Thank you. Sometimes I'm too in my head and I forget that like what I think is being communicated really clearly is still really abstract. But time is something that I'm also navigating in my work, and timelessness, because a lot of West African folklore is not, West African culture in general is not about, America's really fixated on binaries, black, white, you know, good, bad. And so I'm really interested in the gray area, which is why I listed the filmmakers that I listed, because I think they navigate, Park Chan-wook navigates the gray area so masterfully. Guillermo del Toro navigates the gray area so masterfully, and part of that gray area is the liminal space in between at all times, where the spirit world and the abstract world is always constantly in real time colliding with reality. I know it sounds like, this is why Back to the Future as a kid, I was like, oh my God, somebody understands time travel. Like, even as a weird little, you know, quirky kid, I was like, time travel made sense because our past is our present is our future at all times. And part of the reason that we constantly find ourselves in the same place is because we're not reckoning with that, with our past. Mm-hmm. We're pretending like the past is the past, but the past is here all the time. And so I'm trying to figure out ways to make that tangible for audiences in a way that doesn't feel too abstract in my work.
No, I get it. Anna, you know, tell us about working with Morgan Spector. Just like Michelle is such a, you know, you never know where he's coming from. There's a duality to him. You know, tell us about working with Morgan.
What can we say about Morgan? He's
smart.
He's very smart. He asks great questions. He's very collaborative. He's very generous when it's not his take. I mean, he's really an actor's actor. And what I mean by that is he is generous off screen and on screen. So when it's not his coverage, even in between takes, he's open to discussing ideas and themes. It's what's going on. And yeah, Morgan was the best. What I can say is Rose adored him and was obsessed with him. I think almost drove him a little crazy. Rose is Rose in the film. She's a little girl. Yeah,
She loved him. She
we all
adored
loved
him.
Morgan. He was great.
But Rose loved him the most.
Rose did love him the most.
Yeah.
Rose had a lot of energy around Morgan.
So last question, Nikyatu, is that what would you like people to get out of watching your film?
I'm trying to learn to answer this question without sounding like an asshole.
And you
like an
won't.
asshole, it's okay.
In this group, you won't.
Excuse my French.
Yeah.
One of my favorite filmmakers, her name is Safi Faye. She's a Senegalese filmmaker. She has a quote about, you know, once you make a film, it belongs to the audience. It's no longer yours. You know, no matter what your intention is, it's now belongs to whomever watches your film and what they take away. I hope, you know, the goal is always that people have So we went through the Sundance Labs, which was part of what allowed us to find our financing. Like I went through the Screenwriters Lab and the Directors Lab with Nanny, and my producer, Nikyatu went through the Producers Lab with Nanny, which is rare to go through all these labs with the same project. So they really supported us. And one thing that I learned going through the labs is that a phrase that was always a refrain in the Sundance Labs was that motion picture has the potential to be an empathy machine. And I think about that a lot. You know, that refrain came up constantly with the mentors that I had, like Michael Arndt, who wrote Little Miss Sunshine, was one of my most brilliant. He's not a horror writer, but he understands empathy and he understands character construction. And he was so meticulous with my script, and I was so thankful to have him as a mentor. But I hope that people see the world through a lens that they typically would not pay any attention to. Because part of what I mean when I say that there are pieces of me in every character is that, you know, it's odd, it's a weird feeling to have parents who were working class immigrants, are working class immigrants, and you elevate, you know, their sacrifice pays off, their investment pays off, and their child elevates to a class where they're typically the only potentially black woman in the room at all times, you know? And so I see things in the spaces that I inhabit that I think a lot of people around me don't see. And so I want to push the lens to that gaze. I want people to see what I see. Mm-hmm. And so I hope that people just take a little more stock of the people around them who've been made invisible, who are caring for their children, who are cleaning their houses, who are cleaning their hotel rooms, who are, you know, caring for their pets, whatever you value, your dog.
Yeah.
You know, like, I just hope that the gaze is shifted a little bit for people.
Somebody mentioned to me, like, what is this film about? And I said, it's the ultimate American story. This is not an African American story. This is not an immigrant story. This is ultimately an American.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thank you for guys for being here. What an honor. What a thrill. Thank you, everybody. Spread the word.
I enjoyed